I think what we'll do when they come back is practice more, maybe another 30-minute practice session. But before, just while we're waiting, was there any other just thoughts, questions that came up?
When you were talking about the thinking mind, I mean, it's pretty obvious, the whole thing about samsara. But I was wondering if people use certain aspects of their life as a meditation. Like, let's say a computer science programmer, and their mind is, or a piano player, and their mind is completely occupied in a thing.
Yeah.
And they're very zen in many other ways. They're not caught up in the drama of life. But it's still a thinking mind, going into abstract concepts. And is that a healthy thing, or is that still part of samsara?
Yeah, well, it's definitely part of samsara, for sure. So anything that's stuck within a dualistic subject-object framework is part of samsara, essentially, right? So when one starts to penetrate out of samsara, is when basically they have a realization of selflessness, what we call selflessness. And so for like what we call Shravakyana Arhats, they have a realization of the selflessness of a person, and depending on the school of thought we're coming from in Buddhist philosophy, some kind of realization of the selflessness of phenomena. And so that's not full enlightenment, but they're free from samsara at that point because they've eliminated the clinging to emotions, to thoughts, and therefore they're not bound by those, right?
Some people like that, they often don't have a sense of self. They know they're almost channeling it. So they don't have a sense of ownership. I mean, that's how you see a lot of inspired things. Usually it's from that. So, but that is still something. So when you awaken from that, how do you feel? Do you feel that object is still emptiness?
When someone awakens from, you mean an arhat, or you're saying for someone in that's like a
someone who's not in the drama of life, but they're channeling a lot of something. Maybe it's art or intellect. And when they awaken, what is their realization?
I mean, I don't know. You have to ask them. You have to ask them. But no, I mean, definitely, there's very specific criteria for what we're talking about in Buddhism, and really, we're talking about, are we bound by duality or not? But what's a little bit tricky is there's an argument here in Buddhism whether thinking is. We would say thinking is always dualistic, but a Buddha or a being who's free from dualism can also have what's called seeming thoughts. So it's very tricky. And also for a practitioner for a long time, even though someone has a realization of emptiness, it might not mean that emptiness is fully, fully realized throughout every moment of their life. So they might also have glimpses of that, right? Depending on how they're accessing that emptiness, what practice they're using to do that. So in some ways, like first someone might have what's called like in the formal sit, they might have a deep experience of emptiness realization, but then in the post-meditation, they're viewing everything as illusion-like. But, so it's not like a either or. There's also a progressive path for many people. But essentially, we're just familiarizing with the nature of how things are, either through analytical meditation produces that, or more non-analytical meditations of shamatha and vipassana. And then, there's a progressive path of moving through that. But yeah, someone who's just creative in a flow state, that's not necessarily that profound. But it depends on the person.
It's their mind. If it can stop the mind.
Well, maybe, Like they might not be having gross thoughts, but there might be subtle, what's called underlying thoughts, which are similar to like the scroll on CNN, where you have like the main speaker, but then underneath you have this. So they just might not be noticing it. Actually, there's a story about that I thought was pretty funny. It was Dan Harris. I don't know. I feel like quoting Dan Harris. The guy who has 10% Happier, who wrote 10% Happier. Maybe it's him. I can't remember where I heard this, but someone like that who went to like a retreat at an Insight Meditation Center, and people do personal interviews on this retreat, and someone had gone in at the beginning of the retreat, they see the teacher, and then the middle and the end, and so forth. And at the beginning, after they were meditating for a few days, the guy in front of him, he could overhear it, I guess, said something like, "Oh yeah, I can meditate for 5 minutes without thoughts, without thinking," And then the teacher just said, "Okay, keep going," Then by the end, that same guy, he heard him say, "Oh, I can't even go 20 seconds without thinking." And it wasn't that he wasn't thinking before, it's just he wasn't noticing the thinking, right? So that's often the case for many, many people. But with that said, thinking is not the problem here from a Buddhist perspective. I just want to be really clear about that. It's how we're relating to the thinking, right? So it's not about eliminating the thoughts. Many, many Buddhist masters write about that if someone says they don't have thoughts, that doesn't mean there's any kind of realization there. It actually can be a negative meditative state they call hedoa, which is like in Tibetan, which is like blankness, right? So, yeah, and so it's confusing, but I'll talk a little bit about meditative awareness. There's Mingyur Rinpoche, who's one Kagyu master, really amazing master, who just he finished like a year or two ago a 4-year wandering retreat through India and the Himalayas and Nepal, which that's like, I don't think that was easy 100 years ago, but I just imagine that being even less easy, just with the amount of, pollution in cities and also, got dysentery and things like that, basically living like a sadhu, like, wandering around. Anyways, he did that. He's quite incredible Lama. And some of you might know him, but he has this wonderful, I'm looking at the notes right now, he's this wonderful, in one of his books, ways of framing awareness into 3 categories. So first he talks about normal awareness, which has 2 categories. And I think one of the categories is what you're talking about. Yeah, here it is. So one is just, first of all, he's making the premise that awareness is always present. It's something that is just pervasive throughout our human experience. It comes with our mind, essentially. We're born with it. But one aspect of normal awareness is just not noticing that, just being lost in the display of that awareness, lost in thought, lost in rumination, etc. So there's awareness, but they're not recognizing that. And so he calls this, one is attentive and present, and the other form is characterized by distraction, right? But still, he considers that attentive, present awareness normal awareness, not meditative awareness. So like an artist or a sports person or someone, I used to work as a recording engineer, and I could sit in the computer for like 8 hours editing drums, which is, I don't know, you just get into it. It's like playing a game or doing a puzzle. So that is not considered meditation, actually, from a Buddhist perspective. It's considered a type of awareness because there's an attention, there's a presence, but it's not meditative awareness. So, and then obviously we know being distracted is not meditative awareness. So how he defines meditative awareness is quite interesting. He said, meditation requires some degree of being aware of awareness itself, right? Some degree of that. He said, we become cognizant of the quality of the mind, not just of the phenomena perceived by the mind. I'm going to say that again. So this is good because your question is very timely, very, very well timed, because it's exactly what we're going to move into, so it's good. So we become cognizant of the quality of the mind, not just of the phenomena perceived by the mind. So he's making a distinction here between, like, we can know a flower, right? But it's not just knowing or being attentive with that flower or computer or piece of art or whatever creative process, right? It's also the knowing of the awareness itself. And we're purposely strengthening or connecting to that. He says, just paying attention is not yet meditation. The 2 critical ingredients for meditation, and this is even talking about emptiness, this is just talking about shamatha meditation, right? The 2 critical ingredients for meditation are intention and recognition. So we start by purposely resting on a support, like the breath or the body or a flower or something like that. And that's where intention comes in. We're intending to rest there, right? Or intending to focus there. So we also stay aware of what's happening as it happens, and that's the recognition. And that's the moment-by-moment awareness that we're connecting to in shamatha practice. And that's what defines Buddhist shamatha practice, which is a little different than maybe... Now, I'm not saying that can't be in other traditions, a meditation practice, but in Buddhism we define it more specifically. Want me to keep going on this? Yeah? It's not just for you, it's for everyone, so yeah. So here he said, we're fully conscious of the breath, but we also know that we are aware, right? So that's the difference. There can also be a kind of absorption that happens sometimes when, like, let's say, like we're running or something like that, as an example, and we're absorbed in that running. We're fully attentive, fully present, but there's not awareness. There's just absorption into that experience. That actually, some schools of Vedic philosophy, I think their concentration meditation was like that. This is where you find such a range. I mean, I'm in love. I was saying last night, maybe I could, in another life, I would be like a scholar of like Indian religious traditions, because I'm in love with the vastness of Indian thought and culture and religion. Because, often nowadays, like European scholars will take apart, there's this, first of all, making a term Hinduism is ridiculous, instead of just referring to all these, this milieu of amazing yogis and yoginis and philosophers and what comes out of that, the ancient history of India. And so, it seemed like during the time of the Buddha, we often think of Buddhism, obviously. I know actually, when I'm in taxis, like in Bodh Gaya or India or somewhere, and I say I'm Buddhist, there seems to be more of like an attitude of, like Buddhism is like the Buddha is the son of Hinduism, kind of, like in this way. And I think that is one perspective, but sometimes in Buddhist scholarly perspectives, they can get too much into the other extreme, which is like, it's so much different than what it came out of. Meaning, we all know these things were connected. And even after the Buddha's time, you have Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Dharmakirti and Atisha and all these wonderful masters. Even Atisha said, like, he couldn't really tell the difference between very subtle aspects of Vedic Tantra, certain Vedic Tantra, like you could take, sorry, now I'm going to left field, I apologize. I don't know why I started talking about this, of Shaivite traditions, like Tantric Shaivite traditions, very similar to Buddhism. And actually, some of my friends who are more like in doctorate programs and Buddhist studies and stuff, there's some evidence that even some of the masters were the same. So like some of our Buddhist tantric masters and Mahasiddhas were, if someone came to them, depending on what they were studying, they might give them a teaching on Vedic Tantra and then another person Buddhist Tantra. So it's very interesting. So they were holding multiple lineages, and that idea, I don't think exists in a Eurocentric view of the world, because for us it comes very black and white. So why was I talking about that? Oh, absorption. So yeah, so maybe that there's some Vedic schools that did that, but not all. It was my point. Sorry, that was a long way to get to that point. But so Mingyur Rinpoche, just to go further, because I think this is good, because we're gonna do shamatha practice now. So maybe this is a good jumping off point. So he says, let's say we use a flower as support for awareness. So here we would bring attention to the object and use it to support the recognition of awareness. Ding, like that's the answer. We're supporting awareness. So whatever meditation practice we're doing, whether it's meditative awareness or he talks about pure awareness next, which is more coming into a recognition of the nature of that awareness, right? So it's the recognition of awareness, and we're simply sustaining that. So he said, this is what it means by support. The object of meditation, the breath, flower, whatever, supports the cultivation of recognition. So intention, I'm intending to stay with each breath and focus, then recognition of the awareness as we're focusing. Yeah.
So, who is being aware of the awareness of the breath?
That's what you have to look for, man. That's your job, not my job.
Well, okay. I ask that because there's a certain sense in which you're meditating on the breath, and then you're thinking, okay, I want to be aware of my concentration on the breath, and that is sort of bringing forward an I, which in your analytical meditation you're trying to get rid of. So,
yeah. Well, it's just context. So it's sort of, shamatha. Shamatha is that, I'm trying to remember this quote, but it's from Atisha, but I forget now. It's sort of like around how like shamatha is what perfects our vipassana, essentially, meaning like without shamatha, there's no way to make progress in vipassana. And so usually for most of us, there's this progressive set of tools that we're using. First relying on ethical conduct, recognition. Okay, if I go around acting, if I'm like a mini Trump, running around, the world, probably going to be hard to have meditative stabilization because I'll just be agitated all the time, right? Not that he is, but it appears to be. So, so there's that. There's ethics. Then based on that, this cultivation of meditative stabilization and the way Mingyur Rinpoche is talking about it here, in the way of growing our awareness, that recognition of awareness. Then that recognition of awareness strengthens the power of the, the distracted mind lessens naturally, right? And so we start to see more clearly. And so the progression is a little bit like, like I said last night, a glass of muddy water. And if we let it sit long enough, the dirt begins to settle to the bottom of that glass. So it's not like shamatha is something separate from the process. I have to be careful with this. It's not like when we're coming into this recognition, so we have to not get lost in the tools, but understand the tool is a tool. But what we're working with is what we're working with, the mind, the body. And so when the mind is in stillness, still its underlying nature is Buddha nature. When the mind is in movement, its underlying nature is emptiness, It's emptiness whether it's still or in movement. And so for a shamatha practitioner, they're recognizing that, and then at some point, as they're recognizing, so in Mahamudra practice, we recognize the mind in stillness and movement after we gain some stability in shamatha, meaning we're just not the monkey mind isn't just running all over and throwing us everywhere. Some stillness. Then we look at the mind in stillness, and we look at the mind in movement. And then we kind of cross over, and we're basically crossing over into a type of vipassana practice then. So at that point, it's using that recognition of awareness then to have insight or penetrate into the nature of that clear water. So first, we have to get to that clear water, because it's like this. How are we, it's going to be very difficult to discern the nature of clear water if it's muddy. It's really hard. It can be done, just by the way, just to point it out. That's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's when our Buddha nature is pointed out, it's saying, hey man, like your water is muddy, but it's still it has the quality of liberation there. It has the quality of potential for awakening. So it's just a lot easier. So that's the kind of process. So then shamatha in its context is to gain that stability. We're not, and then from a Suchana perspective, once we reach a certain heat within that practice, then we'll apply the insight of vipassana or analysis or whatever. There's many styles of vipassana, and analytical meditation is one. And we'll apply it to then start to draw out some perspectives. It's actually related more to her question earlier of draw out belief, draw out truth, draw out what is truth, what is not truth, what is real, what is unreal. We're not trying to get rid of an I. We're trying to understand that it's like last night's dream. It was never really there, but it appeared, right? That's what we're working with in Vipassana. So yeah, so it's just like context like that, just understanding the context for each. So for many of us, we're going to practice both. But while we're doing one, do one. Don't be too pointed, right? If you want to cultivate shamatha, like he says here, cultivate the intention, then the recognition. And then simply we're just trying to sustain that recognition of awareness. Whether that's we're using the breath to sustain it, or the body, or a flower, or just the awareness itself. We're going to do shamatha without support. It's because I know some of you guys have been practicing for a while, so I want to introduce some maybe new styles of shamatha. Then then someone could move into Vipassana. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't know why I'm extremely long-winded in my answers at this place. I think it's because it's Gelugpa tradition. Just makes me like all of my Gelug training comes. Just want to give really long answers. But as long as the essence is there, right? I don't want to lose you guys in the long answers. Yeah, you're getting the essence. So what do we do in shamatha? We bring attention to the object and use it to support the recognition of awareness. The object of meditation supports the cultivation of recognition. So then there's an example coming from the Buddha here, where a quote where Shakyamuni Buddha says, "A monk when walking knows he is walking. When standing knows he is standing. When sitting knows that he is sitting. When lying down know that he is lying down." Right? So then this knowingness, this recognition of each moment and each activity is the meditation, right? Are you catching the subtle difference there? Yeah? So now we'll practice. Does that sound good? Otherwise, we can go on with long-winded answers, which are useful too, I hope. So I think most of you know general posture info, but if you can assume the 7-point posture, it's really helpful. But mostly, if you can't, there's a 2-point posture, which is a straight back and kind of mostly a straight back and the legs in a comfortable position. So what I'm going to ask you to do now may be a little bit new, but I'm going to ask you to leave your eyes open. And if you really struggle with them open when we're meditating now, we're going to do shamatha without support, so without an object. You can close them halfway too. So this is, as you know, this is a pretty common way to meditate, just with the eyelids half closed, and so there's a little bit of light. Either way, whether they're half closed or fully open, we're not really focused on what's in front of us, vision-wise. The vision's just open, it's available, but it's also soft. We're not staring. It's also, when the eyes are wide open, there's a 180 degree of view here. I personally like to meditate with my eyes wide open. I find it much more helpful when practicing recognition of awareness. So just to start, we're just going to take a moment to come into the body. Again, like I've been saying, just as a starting point. Just let yourself feel the ground, the earth below. Let yourself feel the chair or cushion. So whether your eyes are open or fully open or half closed, just let the vision become like the ears. Just open. Whatever is going to arise or come in, we can know it, but we don't have to necessarily create a story around it or ruminate on it. So just notice how that feels to rest in the body. So we're kind of using the body as an object here. The Buddha said that our body is like a cup and our mind is like the water. So when the cup is still, the water is still. So this is why I'm focusing on body right now. Just rest with the feeling of the legs, feet, your hands on your knees or in your lap. And so from this perspective of body, simply become aware of awareness. So if you'd like to have a more progressive step, so our object is the body for a moment, and then recognize also that you're aware of this body. So it's not just absorbed into the body. There's a recognition of knowing or awareness. And then you can connect with that awareness itself, letting the body be as it is. Simply rest in that recognition of awareness. And this is what we call shamatha without support, meaning we're simply abiding within that recognition of awareness, without a specific support. And the ears are left open, the eyes are left open, the smell, taste, touch, all of our senses. Just like Suzuki Roshi says, when we meditate, it's like we leave all of the doors and windows open. Whatever wants to come in can come in, but we don't serve it tea. We just let it move through the body and mind. We can recognize when we become distracted, and as soon as we recognize we're lost in thought rumination or a story, we're actually in awareness again. So simply just sustain or maintain that recognition of awareness. And that's this practice of shamatha. Calm, clear, undistracted nowness. We simply sustain that. So if the body is allowed to sufficiently still, just connect with the vivid, clear quality of mind. Become aware of that vivid, clear quality and simply sustain that from moment to moment with vigilance and the mindfulness of bringing, or the recognition of awareness happening each time we notice we're lost in thought rumination. And if there's lethargy and sleepiness in the practice, simply just open your eyes, raise the gaze a little bit. This really helps. If there's excitement, you can lower the gaze. But when there's stillness, settled calm in the body, clarity in the mind, and we're simply able to sustain that moment to moment, that's the practice of shamatha. Just let yourself gently maintain that. Dropping attachment to or expectation to certain results. Just being with the mind, body in this moment in this way. Especially emphasizing this recognition of awareness. If you need to use an object like the breath, that's okay. But still, it's the awareness we're cultivating, not the absorption into the breath. I personally like shamatha without support, just resting in the mind's relative nature, its clear, awake quality. See if you can do that. If you need short breaks, go ahead and do that as well. Sometimes trying to do long periods of shamatha isn't so skillful. Just take a mini break for 30 seconds, then again recognize this clear, undistracted nowness. Just maintain that with awareness, vigilance, mindfulness. In one way, we can carry over some elements of the handshake practice here, mainly an awareness of body that's included, a calmness in the body that's included in our present moment awareness. But also a quality of allowing, quality of not seeking. We're not trying to find something through this practice. We're simply just coming into connection with the mind, the awareness as it is now, and cultivating that recognition of awareness, either with an object like the breath or just within the awareness itself. So if you spend the whole time seeking for some experience, really it's not the practice of meditative awareness. It's the practice of seeking experience. So meditation is not an experience. Meditation is meditation. All kinds of experiences can happen from meditation, but that's not the meditation itself. So just let yourself connect with this present moment awareness as it is. The body, the mind, the vivid, clear quality of mind. Simply become aware of that. And then we try to stay aware of that, bringing the attention back or recognizing when we've gotten lost in thought rumination or lethargy or excitement. That's it. It's very simple. So we're training in that maintenance. Simply let the body be as it is, the breath as it is. Connect with awareness. So in relation to seeking some other experience besides this nowness of awareness, Mingyur Rinpoche says, for all our intellectual understanding, we don't really get just how simple it is. And we continue to stick with misguided views. These misguided views share one misunderstanding, and this is the belief that there's something wrong with the present moment. This is why handshake practice can be so useful if you want to go back to that for a moment, alternating between shamatha and handshaking. So we're not denying the present moment, whatever that is. Like I said earlier, we're simply meeting our plate as it is. And here we're trying to connect with this aware quality of mind. Either awareness of breath, that recognition, or just awareness itself. And so simply sustaining that as much as we can in a relaxed way. It's not pushy. There's nothing to get here, just chipping away. So whatever happens is okay. Our job here is to simply notice what arises and let it be. Just watching the parade of thoughts, watching the parade of emotions, as if we're standing on a platform, watching. Okay, so I'm gonna go till 3:45, which gives us a little bit of closing time. So maybe there's an hour left. So maybe we will do like a short break, but not as long as the other one. Maybe just bathroom and just to stretch a little bit. Does that sound good?